Hello, welcome to our first ever Access webinar. Sorry for any unprofessional behaviour at the start. We've just been trying to get our heads around the technology. It's lovely to see people here in the room with us and online too, and seeing people still joining. So Access is an ESRC funded network which aims to champion climate change and environmental social science. And we see this webinar series as a kind of essential strand in that work. And we're going to host a range of academic and non-academic speakers in a series of sessions which focus around the core areas of our work within Access, which are about championing social science, empowering social scientists, enabling successful inter and transdisciplinary working, and thinking about ways to support innovative social science responses that embed our three guiding principles of environmental sustainability, co-production and EDI. It's great that our first speaker today is Professor Birgitta Gatersleben. Birgitta is one of our Access co-directors. She's Professor of Environmental Psychology at the University of Surrey, and she leads the Environmental Psychology Research Group here. And as the first of our speakers, it's really fitting that she's going to talk about the issue of what is environmental social science and why might we need it. So Birgitta's going to talk for about 35 minutes and leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. If you are online, please put your questions in the chat because that's where we'll pick them up from and put them to Birgitta. We'll also take questions from the floor if people in the room have questions. We're going to record the session, and just a kind of a memo for people in the room, the microphones are in the ceiling and pick up all manner of whispers and so we need to be quiet. And then the webinar will be online under the Access webinars soon, yeah, on the Access website. So, Birgitta, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody online. I'll just wave hello because I think that's the camera. I think we've got quite a few people online, and obviously we have some people here in the room, which is great to have somebody to talk to. It's pouring with rain here, so probably that's why they're on more at the moment. Right, so yes, hello everyone. So thank you, Kate, for the introduction. So my name is Birgitta Gatersleben. I run the Environmental Psychology Research Group here at the University of Surrey. And I'm co-director of Access. So as the first Access seminar, I thought we'd try to sort of summarize what environmental social science is and why we need it. Which is quite a challenging thing I found out because I'm an environmental psychologist, so I don't represent all the social sciences. I'm going to attempt to. Right, so as Kate already said, the overarching aim of Access is to champion and coordinate science in the UK. It is frame policy and practice in order to address the overarching big environmental challenges that we face. Now, obviously, the question then is, what can environmental social science deliver? Why do we need it? Well, actually, the answer is probably really, really simple. Because environmental problems are really problems of people. We are the ones who cause the problems. We define the problems, we describe the problems. We are the ones who have to decide what we're going to do next, how we're going to get there, and what we're going to do. So they're people problems. So human decisions and behaviors lie at the root of all of this, and social change is essential and the only way that we can really change these problems. And also, if we go back to the traditional original thinking about what is sustainable development, of course, is not just about environmental sustainability. It is about balancing these different types of what we want to achieve: environmental sustainability, social and economic. We can argue about the validity of this model now. We're not going to do this, and of course there's now 17 sustainable development goals, but the key thing is that sustainable development sits somewhere in the middle. It is something about balancing different costs and benefits. And the environmental problems that we're facing at the moment are experienced by us, by people, and also unequally. So when we think about sustainable development, where we want to go, we need to think about who's being affected in what way and where do we want to go in the future. So environmental social science is essential in helping us to do this. They are effectively, in the end, subjective decisions. Because we can't achieve everything, we can't have it all. So what are we going to do and how are we going to balance the costs and benefits? So a little overview of what I'm going to talk about, a little bit more about why we need this talk. Why do I need to define, why do I need to describe why we need environmental social sciences? Then a little bit about what is it and why do we need it, or what it can bring. I'll draw a little bit on some interview data. So in Access, we have a large network of environmental social scientists and non-social scientists in academia and also outside of academia in policy practice in the nature agencies. We interviewed some of them to ask them some of these questions. So I'll draw on some of the quotes from that. And when I talk about we, why do we need this talk? Why do we need social science? I'm talking basically about everyone who is interested and wants to think about and challenge the environmental issues that we have today. So as in academia, in policy, and practice. And I wrote here, those working to understand and change human-environment relationships. But really, arguably, we also want to address those people who don't actually think about the people aspect of environmental challenges. So hopefully some of them are listening online. So why do we need this talk? Well, I'll start with this lovely picture of cars and air pollution. And it's because I had a PhD student quite a long time ago who did research on the transport-generated air pollution and perceptions of air pollution. And she presented her work at a conference, an air quality conference full of environmental scientists. And at the end of her talk, somebody stood up not to ask her a nice question, but to tell her that she was wasting her time and taxpayers' money. And there's no point in asking people what they think because people are stupid and ignorant, and leave it to the scientists to decide what the problem is. Now, obviously, we would completely disagree with that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's not the first and the only time this happened. I had a student a few years later who, after an interview, a radio interview, she will send a letter to the Department of Useless Studies. Now, it's not just my PhD students. There was actually literature on this, so it's there is whole literature on this, perceptions of social science more generally. The idea that a lot of people think social science is simple, it's obvious, it's common sense, it's not really science, it's totally pointless. Why would we ask people what they think? We know we're people, and it's just common sense and obvious. That's a problem, obviously, so we need to tell people what we can actually deliver. There's another side to that problem as well. People think it's simple. There's an increasing amount of social science research, particularly environmental issues. And some of that social science research is not conducted by social scientists. So there's quite a lot of really poor and I've seen some really scary things really, really poor social science, which is arguably unethical. It can be very biased. It can be, I can see nodding in the room. So there's other people who've had similar experience, and that's obviously also really bad. So we need to demonstrate that it's not simple. There's actually a lot going on. But then there's also an issue with complexity. So when we asked our interviewees to define environmental social science, these are some of the answers that we got. Somebody said, gosh, I have no idea what we're talking about. Or it means so many different things to me. Or somebody else said, it's the environment itself. It's a vast array of different science-specific problems. It's very complicated. And one of my favorite quotes really from this whole interview was from somebody who's not a social scientist, or an engineer. And they responded to the question by saying, well, I associate them, environmental social scientists, with usually commenting that it's really difficult and complicated and never coming up with any solutions. So this is the other side of the problem. So there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding or lack of understanding what environmental social science is and what it can bring. So for some reason, I decided it might be a good idea to summarize what it is and what it can be, acknowledging obviously that it's really complicated. I'm a psychologist. I'm not a political economist or a political scientist or a sociologist. So obviously I'm doing my best, but I apologize to anyone who feels they're not included in exactly the right way. So a little bit of an overview. what is environmental social science? I'll say a little bit about topics and scales, about people, roles and identities, about methods and approaches, and I'll sprinkle in some examples, and these examples are very much just randomly selected, mostly from people that I've worked with, that I know of, or literature that I've read. So there could, of course, be many, many more other examples. The key thing about environmental social science is that it looks at 3 interrelated systems. So it looks at people as consumers, household decision makers, employees, citizens, or global citizens, social systems, and the natural world or environmental resources. And those 3 systems are very much interlinked. So the key thing about environmental social science is not necessarily social science adjusted or applied to environmental issues. There is some of that, of course, which is also valid, but most environmental social science will look at 3 related systems. And social science, environmental social science can study these issues on lots of different scales. So this again is a nice quote from one of our participants who said, well, it could be anything when we talk about the environment, from my little spot here. So for instance, the air quality outside my house, all the way to thinking about the global environment. And it depends on the question, the research question, and what you're looking at. It can also be more or less applied. So environmental social science might be more about applying methods and theories and models that are already out there to answer specific policy questions around behavior change, for instance. Whereas it could also be much less applied, where I develop new models, new theories, new methods to understand these complex relationships. Social science and environmental social science can also be found in lots of different places. And one of the great things about working in Access is that we have learned so much about how many people call themselves environmental social sciences and where they all work in academia as well as outside of academia. But they all use different labels, which is confusing, and it can also cause some conflict sometimes. And not all of them will identify as environmental social sciences either. So for instance, in academia, have a range of sort of subdisciplines, classic disciplines, which is nicely summarized by this quote here, like environmental geography, human geography, environmental sociology, environmental psychology, and there's a lot of other disciplines. Human geographers are much more likely to describe themselves as environmental social scientists, I have found, than, for instance, environmental psychologists would. But arguably, they are all sort of environmental social science at some point. Then there's also more sort of applied disciplines, or disciplines like, subdisciplines that are very much environmental social science from a multidisciplinary perspective, if you like. And some of our interviewees even suggested that if you talk about environmental social science, an environmental psychologist is maybe not an environmental social science, and even asking about subdisciplinary identities is one of the problems, because we need to all work together. Outside of academia, people tend to use different labels. So they have a lot of environmental social science in our broader Access team who work, for instance, in government departments or in nature agencies. They are much more likely to describe themselves as environmental social scientists, maybe behavioral scientists or behavioral analysts. So they're much less likely to use those subdisciplinary terms, if you like. But we all have the same goals and the same ideas, and we all work towards the same principles. A really interesting thing, I think, is that there's a lot of discussion about whether economics is a social science or not. Some people say it is, others say it's not. I would include it in the environmental social sciences, and I think obviously it's very much interrelated with lots of other things as well. But not everybody. And as I said, not everybody would identify as an environmental social science. And one of the interviewees, I think this was somebody not from academia, would actually flipped it on his head when they were asked a question and said, what I don't think of as social science is somebody without any training just asking social science questions. So for them, it was more important that you have social science training from whatever discipline, subdiscipline. So all these different disciplines use different methods, different approaches. They study human-environment relationships in very different ways. And all of them have different things that they can bring to these big questions that we are dealing with. I just summarized some of them here. This is actually taken from somebody else whose reference I've got to put in. But it's just to highlight some of the variety of different perspectives and different approaches. So I'm a psychologist. So in psychology, we study people's feelings, their attitudes, and their behaviors, and sort of mental and behavioral characteristics of individuals. And we're much more likely to run controlled laboratory field experiments, as behavioral economists might do as well, than, for instance, somebody who works in political sciences, who is much more interested in studying the structure and distribution and exercise of power, which is a very different kind of thing, but it's all social science. And of course, if you work with social scientists, yes, you can approach a behavioral scientist, but if you want to work in an interdisciplinary setting or multidisciplinary program, it's worth thinking about what is this that you're looking for, who you should be working with, and perhaps you should have multiple social scientists because they all have different things they can contribute. Just a couple of examples of very different types of things that social scientists, environmental social scientists can bring to the discussions. So on the left-hand side here is an example of psychological research. There's a huge amount of research on this, and there's a lot of studies, that field experimental studies, that basically can compare people's responses to persuasive messages. And a lot of this research has shown that giving people information about what other people do, normative messages, results in greater uptake of a whole range of different pro-environmental behaviours, like towel reuse in hotels, home electricity use, etc., then explaining why it's a good thing to do. So, for instance, the towel reuse in a hotel study, what they found, if you go to a hotel, you see this little thing on your towels that says, please reuse your towels. Use your towels to save water and electricity. And they compared exactly that same label with one that says, the majority of people in this hotel have reused their towel. And what they found was that just telling people that the majority of people in the hotel reuse their towel was more effective than telling people that they should do it to save energy. Now, this is very linear, very simple experimental research, very sort of classic of psychological studies. This is a completely different example, but at the Centre of Understanding Sustainable Prosperity here in the University of Surrey, it's a massive, great big research programme, but a lot of research within that programme is being done by a lot of different social scientists who all look at these problems from different perspectives, highlighting and showing that the dominant perspectives of the meaning of prosperity that we have in our society and our cultures today are deeply rooted in capitalism and income growth, which is neither environmentally sustainable, but also doesn't support people's well-being. And Tim Jackson has written this wonderful book about prosperity without growth, various other books, with others in their team, basically present an alternative way to think about prosperity that is rooted more in relationships, meaning, human well-being, rather than profits and power. So it's a very different kind of social science research and valuable, very valuable in ways. So this gives a little bit of an overview of what different kinds of social science there are. So the question, of course, is why do we need it? What can it deliver? Why should we evolve and include social scientists in our environmental research or in our projects? There have been some useful people that have already looked at this and evaluated it and come up with some lovely descriptions of it. So Castry, for instance, suggested that environmental social science has two overarching aims. The first is to study systematically the presuppositions, norms, perceptions, preferences, relations, regulations, and institutions that together structure how humans value and use the non-living world. Lots of words. And to identify and evaluate ways of altering human behavior in light of one or more definitions of a desirable or necessary end. So, in normal words, to describe where we are, how did we get here, where are we at the moment, and how does it all fit together, and to think about where do we want to go and how we're going to get there. There's also other people have also come up with lovely descriptions. So with 6 ideas, so concepts of why conservation social science is important. So they didn't look at environmental, but conservation social science, but it's very similar principles here. There were 6. I summarized them and grouped them into 3, which I think maybe is a simplified overview of the different ways social science can be useful and beneficial. So there's descriptive social science. Descriptive social science is about understanding, describing, and diagnosing the problem. What is it? How do we get here? And where are we now? And what is the problems that we're dealing with? Instrumental social science is environmental social science is more about providing solutions to specific problems. So somebody in a local authority might come to you and say, how do I change somebody's behavior? Or why is this not working? Or how do I make this work? Innovative environmental social science is more about challenging assumptions, coming up with alternative visions and ideas. So for instance, for descriptive social science, you might want to, for instance, evaluate or study the social impacts, inequality and well-being impacts of existing transport and mobility patterns in a city, in a town, or in the world. You might want to look at the drivers of individual transport choices. You might want to look at the social and political factors that influence support for green policies. So it's more descriptive and analytical. In instrumental ways, you might want to test persuasive messages, like I give you the example of the norm messages, evaluate the impact of policies, or maybe design and run processes that enable different voices to be heard, public engagement process. So it's answering specific questions, providing instrumental solutions, sometimes called actionable insights, which is a very favorite term at the moment in policy. Whereas innovative social science, environmental social science is much more about thinking about alternative models of prosperity, like I said before, thinking about different indicators of environmental sustainability, thinking more about the social impacts and challenging the social impacts and challenging the way we're thinking and coming up with different solutions. I'm going to my computer. Now, very recently, actually only a few weeks ago, the Academy of Social Sciences published a wonderful report to tell us why we need social science, but this was in relation to STEM subjects. So it's not necessarily environmental social science, but it was so well timed. I have to, of course, refer to it here. And they talk about the secret sauce of social science, and suggested there are 4 key ingredients to social science. Picture here. To social sciences enable whole systems thinking. A major contribution of social science. Also, what they are demonstrating in their report is that social sciences play a much bigger role in informing policy than a lot of other sciences. So they're hugely important for policy. They underpin smart and responsible innovation, for instance, looking at legal and ethical issues, which is really important for innovation in the future. And they are essential to international collaboration and tackling shared global challenges that share together. They also say that social sciences are not something to be poured over at the end before serving the STEM science back up to society. In a sec. So again, I want to just give you a quick example. So this idea of complexity. Now, I'm not a complexity scientist, so I don't know exactly how this all works, but I do know that there are some amazing people out there, organizations out there that are developing methods and models to understand and evaluate and assess complexity. So this is an example of the work that's done here at CCAN, Centre for Weighting Complexity and Access. One of the things that they do is work with policymakers to do participatory mapping exercises and evaluate the sort of complex impact of policies, environmental policies, come up with these wonderful, fabulous maps here. So it's an understanding that the social world is really complex. The changes in policy and practice don't have a simple linear relationship. So the example that I gave before about norm studies, obviously, is very simple and linear, but longer term and in the real world, the impacts of policies might be much more complicated. So in terms of coming back to this quote by Wilson from the Academy of Social Sciences, the social sciences are not something to be added or poured over at the end. Environmental social science really should be integrated at all stages, right from the start in research programs, the stage of different research programs, from concept development, design and planning, all the way up to analysis and dissemination in research and development, from problem analysis to data collection, reporting, etc. And also in the policy cycle, right from developing the rationale for the policy, setting the objectives, phrasing, monitoring, evaluating, and providing feedback. At all of these stages, social science input is really beneficial and really useful. And if you don't include social scientists, you can make mistakes, leave big gaps. So this is one of the final example that I just wanted to highlight, some work by one of my colleagues, Melissa and myself, who's taken a very well-known model on behavior change, the behavior change wheel, or the COMB model, which suggests that behavior is influenced by factors associated with capability, motivation, and opportunity. And there's a whole deal of things that you can do to address these concepts. So the behavior change wheel is a practical guide that can help design and evaluate behavior change interventions, but it can also be used to assess and evaluate existing interventions. So Melissa used it to analyze international biodiversity policies and found that there were massive gaps in those policies in terms of what has been used and what's been adopted in terms of behavior change. So there's a huge amount of opportunities. If this was developed right from the start, of course, those gaps and opportunities, gaps would not necessarily be there. So to bring it all together, environmental social science is the systematic study of people in relation to their social and physical environment. Involves a range of disciplines. Environmental social science can be found in lots of different roles. There's lots of different methods. Study different topics at different scales, but they all look at the interaction between social systems, people, and the natural world, and how they are associated and related to it. So we need social science, environmental social science, because we got here, because of human activity. It's us who caused the problems. The problems that we have, of course, are experienced by other people, but unequally. And social change is essential for getting us out of here. And decisions on what is essential, desirable, and feasible, sustainable future are, in the end, subjective social decisions. There has to be an interaction, agreement, social processes play huge, and values and norms, political power, and all those things play huge influence on the decisions we're going to make in the future. So environmental social science are essential to help us understand how we got here, to help us avoid making the same mistakes, to think about where we want to go next and how we might want to get there. So my summary of instrumental and critical and innovative ways social science can contribute. The key thing is that trained environmental social scientists are essential. We need trained environmental social scientists to do good research. They can provide workable, acceptable, feasible ways forward that are grounded in an understanding of social processes and human behavior based on theory development and strong scientific basis, advanced analytical methods and principles of ethics, quality and fairness. And they can help challenge and propose alternative, what Castree calls values, means, end packages. So where do we want to go? How we're going to get there? and social indicators of sustainable development based again on a thorough understanding of past, present, and desirable future people environment. So I will. Oh, it's meant to be a picture underneath. Oh. It's meant to be the other way around. So I'll go back to the why do we need? Why did my PhD student? Why should she have done? Why was she valuable doing that research? Well, we need to ask people. We need to understand why people and how people perceive transport-generated air quality, because we need to understand the impact of those perceptions, whether they're accurate or not, on people's well-being and on behaviour, and the level to which that is equal or unequal and affected and how. We also need to ask people and engage with people to find out how they perceive air quality, to enable them to empower them to take action. Maybe if they don't have a clear understanding where it comes from, who's doing it, what the solutions are, we should help them, empower them to make better decisions. And we need to work with people to understand what a clean environment, local or global, would actually look like. What do you think it should be, and how we're going to get there. And all of that requires difficult decisions, difficult social decisions. So we need social scientists to do that. And that's the end. Thank you. Any questions?